Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Congressman Bera. Congressman, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me on.
You must have had a busy week, so I want to dive right into it. Earlier this month, the chair of the NRCC told Republicans reportedly to stop holding town halls. Based on your comments this week, it seems like you want to capitalize on this moment. You floated the ideas of Democrats going into these red spaces, talking to constituents in these red districts. Can you tell us more about your idea?
Yeah, so I think it's incredibly important. If Republican members aren't going to explain what Donald Trump, Elon Musk are doing to the services that they depend on, I think it's an obligation for us to go into some of these districts, certainly in a targeted way, and explain to them, if they cut Medicaid 25%, what that's going to mean to their access to healthcare. If they shut down the Department of Education, what that's going to mean to their public schools. Again, it is hard to win re-election if you're not talking to your voters or your constituents, but we also have to present a case and make sure they understand what's happening to the federal government.
You want to go in a targeted way. What does that way look like? What's the strategy here?
So at the end of the day, the best way for us to put democratic ideas forward and from our end protect the country from some of these really dangerous cuts that Donald Trump and Elon Musk are perpetrating, we have to figure out what are those districts that we can win. We know the 20 most vulnerable Republican districts. We're going to have candidates that eventually are running against those Republicans. But in the meantime, there's nothing that prevents us from going into those districts, talking about how much these rural communities depend on Medicaid. Their hospitals need Medicaid funding to stay afloat, and then put pressure on those Republicans to say, hey, wait a minute, if you vote for this reconciliation package, you're going to take healthcare away from your very constituents. Are you sure that's the vote that you want to take?
I'm not sure if you saw this, but Congressman Chuck Edwards from North Carolina, he defied the reported order of not holding town halls. He held one this week. He was faced with boos. He was faced with angry constituents, protesters all around. What do you make of that?
I've heard about what happened to Congressman Edwards' town hall. I haven't seen the clip yet. I think that's his constituents responding to the concern about what they're seeing coming out of the Trump administration. That's very organic. We saw it happen to Democrats in 2010 around the Affordable Care Act vote, when we lost a lot of Democratic seats because Democrats then became afraid to have town halls. I think you've got to show up, you've got to let your constituents express their opinions, and then you've got to explain the votes that you're taking.
I know that Politico had an article with some of the Republicans with an over average number of constituents who rely on Medicaid. Is that something you would be targeting as well? And what are those conversations with Republicans looking like, especially those ones that have a large swath of constituents who rely on these types of entitlements?
So as we're talking to Republican colleagues saying, look, be very careful about this vote on Medicaid, I think they're getting nervous about that vote, which is why you saw on the reconciliation package, the framework of their budget deal, they're trying to say, well, Medicaid's not in there. The truth is, and the reality is, there's no way for them to get $880 billion out of the energy and commerce portion of that bill without cutting Medicaid. So we have a few weeks to make the case and tell these Republican members why it would be dangerous to their own constituents, to their own rural hospitals, and get them to change their vote.
I feel really lucky in the past couple of weeks. I've talked to a number of Republicans, a number of Democrats in the House. Republicans have all told me, and I've heard President Donald Trump say it himself, we aren't touching Medicaid, we aren't touching Medicare, and we aren't touching Social Security. Democrats, on the other hand, have said that's a lie. I was speaking with your colleague, Congressman John Larson, yesterday, and he said that's a lie. They are going after these things. What do you think? What do you say?
Well, if they're going to stick to this budget framework that they put out there, they are going to have to go after Medicaid. And again, if they don't, great. Then they don't have anything to worry about. If they don't touch Medicare, great. They don't have anything to worry about. Elon Musk has said the exact opposite, though, when it comes to Social Security. He's called Social Security a Ponzi scheme. Social Security is a system that you pay in throughout your whole working life so that you can have some security at the end of your retirement. So it is a system that millions of Americans rely on and count on to stay out of poverty. If Elon Musk is calling it a Ponzi scheme, yeah, I think Donald Trump listens to Elon Musk.
I know that you said earlier in this conversation you want to host these town halls and talk about the Department of Education as well. Earlier this week, we saw over 1,300 staffers at the Department of Education fired. And according to multiple reports, President Donald Trump has contemplated signing an executive order dismantling the entire department. What's your reaction to that news?
I think it's going to be disastrous to every school district in this country. That means Democratic districts and Republican districts. We're obviously going to do what we can to preserve vital services that our kids depend on. School lunch programs. For many kids, that's the only hot meal they get every day. Special programs for children with disabilities, etc. That's going to impact Republican districts, and many of these Republican voters are going to have to hold their members of Congress accountable. We're not going to let them, if they do follow through with this, it's going to hurt their kids as much as it's going to hurt Democratic kids.
I know Republicans have said we're not doing anything that's would totally dismantle or totally change education in this country. Instead, we want to give the power back to the states when it comes to education. What do you make of that argument?
So I'm fine with power and control of schools. That's why you have school boards. That's why you have parent-teacher associations, things like that. That's fine. But for programs like school lunch programs, for programs that go to local farmers and try to provide fresher fruits and vegetables, make America healthy again, programs that service students with disabilities, a lot of that comes from federal funding. If you cut that funding, you cut those programs.
I was speaking with your colleague, Congressman Tim Burchett, yesterday, and we were talking about the Department of Education, and he told me, quote, people are going to be astounded and shocked the amount of waste, abuse, and fraud that's at the Department of Education. Is that true in your opinion? What does that look like?
Sure. If there's waste, if there's programs that are not effective or efficient, great. Let's work on that together. Again, how I would do that is I would actually go to the cabinet members, come to Congress, and let's do it with a scalpel in a specific way, not just haphazardly lay off individuals without knowing what that impact's going to be.
Congressman, we haven't seen test scores bounce back since COVID. And if you look at the national test score average in this country, it's shocking to see. What do you think by dismantling the Department of Education, what is that going to do to education in this country?
Yeah, I think it's going to make it harder. I totally agree that we're getting something wrong with education. If Donald Trump came out and said, we're going to do something that radically improves our literacy rates in America, we're going to try to get every 5-year-old being able to read in America, great. Let's work on that. Let's figure out how we get back to better literacy rates, better math scores, better education. I'm not against that. And there are lots of things that I think Republicans and myself and Democrats would find in common. I think we should do more vocational and technical education, wood shop, metal shop, auto shop, things that I had when I was a kid. Probably less testing, not more testing, and teach kids how to put their cell phones down and get out there and play.
Congressman, I feel really lucky in my role that I get to talk to people like you, members of Congress on both sides of the aisle. And something that's been a trend in my conversations with Democrats is they seem really united right now. Democrats in the House, they are angry with DOGE. They don't like what they're seeing. They think Elon Musk is recklessly cutting jobs, cutting departments. They're vigorously calling out. All of you voted against the CR, the continuing resolution. Do you wish that you saw this same unity that you're seeing in the House, in the Senate, especially when you hear the Senate Minority Leader saying he's going to support that?
I think Chuck Schumer's going to take a bad vote. This is not a bipartisan budget deal. This is a budget deal that Republicans put together. It's a budget deal that they never asked us to weigh in on and negotiate. So Chuck Schumer's caving to this. If they wanted to pass this budget deal on their own, fine. Now it's become a bipartisan budget deal, and you can see the tweet that Donald Trump put out there thanking Chuck Schumer. I think it's a mistake on his end.
Congressman, Congress is out next week. You're going back to your district. I know that Democrats are at a disadvantage right now. You don't have a majority in the House or Senate. The president's Republican. So what are you going to tell them when they say, hey, I'm nervous about Medicare and Medicaid. Hey, I rely on my Social Security checks. What are you telling them?
I'm nervous about those things too. So what I'm going to tell them first is next week I'm going to meet with our hospitals, our doctors, the folks that help administrate Medicaid and say, okay, if these cuts come, are we ready for them? What are we going to do? How are we going to work together? Same thing with our county office of education. If these cuts go through at the DOE, how is that going to impact our ability to educate our kids in my district in Sacramento County? Second, I am going to explain to them the best strategy is we just have to get 3 Republicans to vote against cuts to Medicaid, and we can save these programs. Again, I'm not suggesting we shouldn't try to make these programs better and more efficient. If there's fraud, address that fraud. I'm saying millions of Americans rely on Medicaid as their only source to get health care. We ought to protect this program.
And that's what every Democrat who I've talked to have said. Hey, if there's fraud, I'm the first one. I want to find it. I want it out of there. Do you think you're going to find 3 Republicans to get on board with you?
It's up to putting pressure on them from their constituents. They expect me to oppose the Medicaid cuts, but if the folks that they represent, that they work for, are speaking loudly to them, if the doctors in their districts are saying, hey, don't do this, if the hospital administrators are saying, if you pass this budget, it's going to close our hospital and we're going to have to lay off thousands of folks that rely on you as their congressman, I think you can get 3 folks to say, hey, wait a minute, we don't want to do this.
And Congressman, before I let you go, I think it's a really important point because the Republicans, once again, are saying we aren't cutting Medicare, we aren't cutting Medicaid. That is just a talking point. That's a Democratic talking point. You're saying that is not true. The writing is on the wall. So what is the response to that?
Well, let's see. That budget vote's going to come up, and if they cut Medicaid and they've said they weren't going to cut Medicaid, shame on us if we don't hold them accountable.
Congressman, I appreciate the conversation today. Thank you so much for joining me. You're welcome back anytime.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for having me on. Be well.